Listen, I need you to sit with something for a moment, because what I'm about to tell you cannot be understood halfway. Not while you're scrolling. Not while part of your mind is already 3 tasks ahead, replaying a conversation from yesterday, or rehearsing one for tomorrow. This needs your full weight, your full attention, because your grandmother knew something about you before you ever knew it about yourself. And what she knew has been protecting you your entire life without you ever realizing it was there. There was a moment, maybe you don't remember it consciously, but your body does, your blood does, when someone who came before you, someone whose blood runs through your veins right now, stood in a dark room, or a cold field, or a cramped ship's hold, or a jail cell that was never supposed to hold someone with that much fire, and made a decision. They decided that whatever came for their bloodline after them would not stand alone. They didn't know your name. They didn't know your face. They didn't know what year you'd be born into, or what kind of world would be waiting for you, but they knew you were coming. Somewhere in the marrow of their exhaustion, in the middle of the worst night of their life, they knew someone like you would exist eventually, and they built something for you before you ever took your first breath. You feel that shield sometimes, don't you? That strange, unexplainable sense that you should have broken by now and didn't. That the plan against you should have worked and somehow fell apart in ways nobody, including you, could fully explain. That's not luck. That's not coincidence, and deep down you already know it isn't. That is an inheritance. That is a debt being repaid across generations, and you are the one collecting on it, whether you asked for it or not. You have to understand what your ancestors actually survived, not the sanitized version, not the tidy family story trotted out at holidays, softened for polite company, stripped of its actual horror so it fits between the mashed potatoes and the small talk. I mean the real weight of it, the hunger that didn't end after one bad season, the displacement that meant leaving behind everything familiar with no promise of anything on the other side, the violence that showed up without warning and without mercy, the nights they genuinely did not know if morning would come, and they had every single reason in the world to give up completely, to let the despair finally win, and instead, they chose to keep one single thread of hope alive, not for themselves, for someone they would never meet, for you. Every time they refused to break, they were weaving something. Every single time they got back up after the world knocked them down and told them to stay there, they were reinforcing a wall around a person who didn't exist yet, who wouldn't exist for decades, maybe generations. That wall is around you right now while you're listening to this. And the people who have tried to tear you down, the ones who dug into your past looking for ammunition, who spread lies about who you really are, who waited patiently for you to finally collapse under the weight they kept quietly adding. They were never just fighting you. They thought they were. They had no idea. They were fighting generations, and generations do not lose that easily. Generations do not fold just because one arrogant person in one single lifetime decided they didn't like the way you carried yourself. Think about the times something should have destroyed you and somehow didn't. I want you to actually sit with specific memories here, not just nod along abstractly. Think about the setup that should have worked perfectly and somehow fell apart at the last possible moment, right before it could finish you. Think about the person who tried to take everything from you, your reputation, your peace, your sense of safety, and somehow lost their own footing in the process instead. Tripped over their own scheme in a way they never saw coming. You called it luck at the time. Maybe you called it a fluke, a stroke of fortune you didn't examine too closely because you were just relieved it worked out. It wasn't luck. That was the shield, doing exactly what it was built to do, exactly what it has always done, quietly, invisibly, in the background of a life you thought you were navigating completely alone. Here is what nobody ever told you. What nobody sat you down and explained. That protection isn't passive. It isn't some lucky charm sitting quietly in a drawer, activating only when you remember to believe in it. It is active. It is a force with memory, a force with intention, a force that has been paying attention this entire time, even when you felt utterly unseen. It remembers every ancestor who prayed for a future they would never personally witness. It remembers every one of them who worked themselves past exhaustion so the next generation, and the one after that, could stand a little taller, breathe a little easier, walk into rooms without having to shrink first. It remembers everyone who whispered your name into the dark before you even had one, before anyone knew what to call the person who would eventually be standing exactly where you're standing today. That shield doesn't just block attacks aimed at you, it remembers who's throwing them. It keeps score in a ledger you were never shown, and that ledger has been accumulating for longer than you've been alive. And that's the part your enemies never understood, the part that has confused and infuriated them without them ever being able to name why. They thought they were dealing with one person, a single, isolated target they could wear down through attrition, isolate from the people who cared about them, and eventually break through sheer persistence. They had no idea, none whatsoever, that they were actually going up against an entire lineage. Every single time they came at you, they weren't just facing your individual strength, your own personal reserves of willpower, which would have been formidable enough on their own. They were facing every ancestor who refused to let their line end in defeat. Every one of them stacked behind you, invisible, silent, absolutely immovable. That's why they're exhausted and you're still standing. Have you noticed that? Have you actually paused to notice how tired they seem? How their attacks have gotten sloppier, more desperate, less coordinated over time, while you, somehow, despite everything, are still here. That's why their plans keep collapsing in ways they genuinely cannot explain to themselves, let alone to anyone else. They keep reaching for the same tactics that work reliably on ordinary people: isolation, slander, financial pressure applied at exactly the wrong moment. Chipping away, slowly and deliberately, at your confidence until you start doubting your own perception of reality. And none of it sticks the way it's supposed to. None of it lands with the force they intended. Not because you're invincible in some cartoonish, untouchable sense. You're not. You bleed like anyone else. But because you were never actually fighting them alone, even in the moments when it felt, with absolute certainty, like you were completely and utterly by yourself. You have to let that truth land fully, not just skim past it. Every single time you felt completely isolated in a battle, every time you lay awake convinced that no one was coming to help you, that you'd have to figure this out entirely on your own strength, you weren't actually alone. There was a presence surrounding you the entire time that you simply could not see with your physical eyes, built from people who no longer have bodies walking this earth, but who never, not for 1 second, stopped having will. Call it ancestry if that word resonates with you. Call it inheritance if that feels more precise. Call it whatever fits your particular understanding of the world and how it works. The label matters far less than the reality underneath it. Something has been absorbing blows that were meant to finish you off completely, and it has been doing this since before you were old enough to form a single conscious memory of your own life. This is why you've survived things that, by any reasonable measure, should have ended you, not because you're lucky in some cosmic lottery sense, because you are the direct result of people who decided, generations before you took your first breath, that their suffering would end with them, in their own generation, and would not be passed forward as a curse to inherit. They decided their strength, on the other hand, absolutely would be passed forward. That decision, made in circumstances you can barely imagine, is why you have capacities today that you never had to fight for from scratch. That decision is why certain doors that should have been permanently locked for someone in your position simply weren't locked at all when you reached them. That decision is precisely why you keep waking up the next morning after nights that, by every logical measure, should have buried you completely. I want you to think, really think, about what it actually took for that shield to come into existence in the first place. Somebody had to endure something genuinely unbearable, something you and I can only imagine in the abstract, and choose, in the middle of that unbearable thing, not to pass that particular brokenness forward to the people who would come after them. Somebody had to sit in a despair so total it must have felt permanent, felt like the only truth that would ever exist again, and still decide, not my descendants, they will not carry this exact weight the way I have had to carry it. That single decision, made by someone whose name you might not even know anymore, is why you have capacities and instincts you didn't have to build entirely from nothing. That decision is why you keep encountering unexpected help exactly when you need it most, help that arrives with suspiciously perfect timing. That decision is why you are still here, reading or listening to these words right now, instead of having become one more name added to a long list of people the world quietly ground down into dust. And the people who resent you for this, who cannot stand your resilience, who take your refusal to break as some kind of personal insult directed specifically at them, they sense something in you they can't actually name, something that unsettles them at a level deeper than conscious thought. They feel, without being able to articulate it, that they're not just up against you as an individual. They feel the weight of an entire lineage standing behind your eyes every time you look at them, without flinching, without backing down, without offering them the fear they were counting on to fuel their next move. That's what genuinely unsettles them. That's precisely what makes them escalate instead of simply walking away and finding an easier target. Because on some buried level they already know that backing down would be the only rational response to what they're actually facing. Their pride simply won't let them admit that out loud, not even to themselves. But here is the truth they will eventually be forced to face, whether they want to or not, whether it happens gradually or all at once. You cannot outplot generations. You cannot out-scheme a shield that has been reinforced by every single ancestor who refused, categorically refused, to let their bloodline end in defeat. Every attack they throw in your direction gets absorbed into something far bigger than that isolated moment of conflict. It doesn't simply bounce off you and disappear into nothing. It gets recorded somewhere you can't see. It becomes one more entry in a story that shield has been keeping track of, and that story, in the end, does not favor the people who spend their energy trying to tear you down. You were never actually meant to fight this battle relying only on your own individual strength. That was never the intended design, not from the very beginning. The design, from the start, was for you to move through this world backed by everyone who came before you, drawing freely on strength you didn't personally have to construct from raw nothing, because it had already been built for you, painstakingly, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, generation after generation after generation, long before you arrived to inherit it. So stop apologizing for how difficult you are to break. I mean that seriously. Stop wondering, in those quiet moments of self-doubt, why you're still standing when every external circumstance insisted you shouldn't be. You are not some accident of resilience, some statistical outlier that happened to get lucky against the odds. You are the intended outcome of it. Every single ancestor who endured what they endured, who survived what should have killed them, who kept moving forward when stopping, would have been so much easier, was aiming, whether they knew it consciously or not, at this exact moment right here. You, still here. Still whole, even with all your cracks and scars. Still moving forward despite absolutely everything that has been thrown at you to make you stop. Let that shield finally do what it was built to do. You don't have to keep fighting every single battle with clenched fists and constant, exhausting vigilance. You don't have to carry the draining belief that if you stop watching your back for even one moment, everything you've built will collapse instantly. It won't. It genuinely won't, because you were never actually unguarded to begin with, not even in your most vulnerable moments, not even when it felt otherwise. Feel that for a second, right now, wherever you are. Feel the weight lift, even just slightly, as you begin to understand, maybe for the first time in your adult life, that you were never doing any of this completely alone. Every unexplainable survival, every collapsed plot against you that should have succeeded but didn't, every moment you fully expected to break, and somehow, against all reasonable expectation, didn't. That was never just you, relying solely on your own willpower. That was your inheritance, stepping in exactly when it needed to, exactly when the moment demanded it, exactly on time. They can keep trying if they want to. They can keep plotting, keep digging for ammunition, keep scheming in whatever rooms they think you can't hear them in, keep waiting patiently for the day you finally, inevitably fall. I need you to hear this clearly. That day isn't coming. Not because you're somehow immune to pain in some superhuman sense. You're not, and you never claimed to be. But because you were never facing this world with empty hands, not for a single day of your life. You were handed a shield before you were even born, forged in fires you never had to personally walk through, by people who loved a future they knew, with absolute certainty, they would never live to see themselves. Think now about what that actually means for how you move through the rest of your days. It means the exhaustion you feel isn't a sign that the shield has failed you. It means the battles that still come your way aren't proof that the protection isn't real. Even shielded people get tired. Even protected people still have to walk through the fire themselves. The shield was never a promise of an easy road, only a promise that you would not walk that road utterly alone, without resource, without reinforcement, without something ancient and patient standing quietly at your back. Consider for a moment all the relationships in your life that have tested this without you realizing it. The people who came close to you specifically because they sensed something worth exploiting, something they assumed was undefended, and then, somehow, inexplicably to them, their plans unraveled the moment they got too close. They assumed it was because you outsmarted them, and maybe in part you did, but there was something underneath your intelligence too, something older, something that has been quietly rearranging outcomes on your behalf since before you had the vocabulary to describe what was happening. This is also why certain opportunities have arrived at precisely the moment you needed them, dressed up as coincidence, as networking luck, as being in the right place at the right time. You've probably thanked your own preparation for those moments, and you should. Your effort matters and always will. But preparation alone doesn't explain everything. Preparation explains why you were ready. It doesn't fully explain why the door opened exactly when it did, why the right person happened to be listening, why the timing lined up in ways that felt almost too precise to be accidental. That precision has a source, and the source has been with you far longer than you've been aware of its presence. I also want you to consider the people who left your life right before certain storms hit. The ones whose absence felt like abandonment at the time, but turned out, months or years later, to have spared you from being caught in the blast radius of something you couldn't have seen coming. That too is the shield working, quietly rearranging the pieces around you so that what was meant to reach you never fully lands, or lands with far less force than it was designed to carry. None of this means you get to stop showing up for your own life. The shield was never meant to replace your effort, your discernment, your willingness to keep walking forward even when you're afraid. It was meant to walk alongside that effort, to catch what your own strength alone couldn't have caught, to close gaps you didn't even know existed until you looked back and realized how narrowly you'd passed through them. Your ancestors didn't build this shield so you could become passive. They built it so you could be bold without being reckless, so you could take the kinds of risks your calling requires without the constant paralyzing fear that one wrong move will be the end of you. So here is what I need you to carry forward from this moment onward, past the point where you finish listening to these words and step back into whatever your day requires of you next. You are not fighting alone, and you never have been, not for one single day of your existence on this earth. Every setback that should have finished you and didn't was never a mystery. It was an inheritance quietly doing its work in the background, exactly as intended. Every enemy who underestimated the scope of what they were actually up against will eventually understand, in their own time and in their own way, that they were never just fighting you. They were fighting an accumulated weight of survival, sacrifice, and stubborn, unbreakable hope that stretches back further than they could ever hope to trace or comprehend. Carry that shield forward with a little more awareness today than you had yesterday. Stand a little taller, not out of arrogance, but out of simple recognition of what's actually true. You've already won more battles than you will ever be able to fully count, more than you'll ever get full credit for, and you did not win a single one of them alone. Somewhere behind you, unseen but never absent, an entire lineage has been standing at your back the whole time, and it isn't going anywhere now.